Welcome again to our Near-Death Experience interview series. I'm Robert Mays. Suzanne and I are interviewing people who have had an NDE and who have also received visions of future world events. These interviews are part of our research project that's exploring NDErs' insights into the deeper meaning of the challenges currently facing humanity. In this interview, Suzanne and I asked Rabbi Stephen Robbins to give the full narrative of his fifth NDE, which occurred in 2005. After that, we administered the NDE Scale to Stephen with reference to this NDE. This scale was developed by NDE researcher Bruce Grayson. It measures the depth of the NDE by the number of elements in the NDE and their intensity. Stephen's fifth NDE score was 30 out of 32, which falls within the top 1 to 2% of NDEs in terms of the depth of the experience. Here is our interview. So, Stephen, can you give us the narrative of your fifth NDE that happened in 2005 with your third lung collapse?
It was in December of 2004 that I came down with a cold, and the cold went into my lungs, and it became increasingly difficult for me to breathe. And I was barely conscious when my son took me to the hospital at my request. My pulmonologist had left instructions to never intubate me because given the kind of issues I have, which is severe lung damage, that to intubate me might cause my lungs to spasm. So they filled me full of all kinds of bronchial dilators and cortisone and adrenaline. The pain in my lungs was searing. Because the cells in my lungs were struggling to take in the oxygen that needed to go into the blood. And the feeling of drowning, I guess it's the best way to say it, and the struggle for each breath was the center of my consciousness. And at some point, I gave up breathing. And in giving up the breathing, I was supported by my guides, by my shomrim, who at that point were ancestors, teachers who had been with me since my birth. And they and the malachim, the divine messengers, lifted me out of my body, and I could look down at me and see the enormous pain and struggle that I was in. And at that point, I was the feeling of relief that I was not there anymore. And the feeling of what I call discorporation, that the physical world around became thinned like a veil, and just simply, and I don't like the word moved, but was lifted out of it. And as in the other NDEs, felt an enormous sense of relief that I no longer had to breathe in order to live, that the living was in my soul, in my consciousness, not in my body. And so I left and was lifted by these guides and taken through a variety of stages, 5 dimensions of being from the physical to the deep psychological to the principles of my being, and to finally to make connection. So if you want, I can go through each of those stages and explain what happened and what I felt.
Yes, yes, please.
So the first stage is best described by the level of soul that's in the body. It's called nephesh, or breath. And it is what we share with all living being in this world. It's Adam being formed out of the particles of existence. And so this dependency on the physical to sustain us, by that time I had learned was also a great burden given everything I'd gone through. So relieving myself of this enormous struggle to stay alive, to hold on to the physical, was about letting it go so that I no longer needed breath.
And you,
Which is,
feel,
go ahead.
What were your feelings here at this point?
Fear and anxiety about no longer being with my wife, my family, my friends, the work I'd been doing, and the feeling that I had arrived at a stage in my life, given what my wife and I and my teaching and my practice had generated for so many people in the world, as well as myself, that there was this profound sense of loss, that somehow this sense of fulfillment that I felt I was finally doing was coming to an end. And I knew at that point that to live in that regret was to deny that everything that I had been participating in those wonderful years would in fact destroy what I'd accomplished. And I knew that whatever work I had done with others, either individually or in classes or in groups, would continue on its own, and that I would be present in so much of what was going on in the world, not because of me and not about me, my name would not even appear, but that I had come to a point of feeling that though I didn't want to go, that it was time and acceptable to go.
Was this knowing something that came to just your thoughts, or was there a communion with your God also helping you to come to this realization?
I'm really not sure. I know that the persona that was called the Abba, the father of all of this, when he embraced me and he, quote, kissed me, unquote. And as I said in an earlier description, had put a glowing needle into my heart. He pulled the needle out and he said, "You no longer need this." And when the needle came out, my heart broke. And then I cried out in anguish. And then the anguish turned to silence, real deep silence. And the usual, questions and grinding that goes on in our daily consciousness just left. And he said, "This is what you've been practicing with others, and you need to relearn to do it for yourself." It was then that instead of looking backward on my life, I simply felt this sense of welcome, that whatever was approaching, whatever would come as I left, would only be as I knew before, but had never experienced so completely, that I was on the verge of whatever was to come from what I had been working for. So that the phrase, so below, so above, so above, so below, means that whatever goes on here is an extension of whatever's going on further on. So that there was this sense of expectation and joy, what I call awe, the word yirah, which is everything from great joy and ecstasy to fear.
Is this the second level?
Hmm?
It's the second level, the second.
Yeah, that second level is called ruach, meaning consciousness, and it is the consciousness that is not contained within the brain or the body, but suffuses the brain and the body and sustains it when that consciousness, when my consciousness was lifted out, not just from my brain, but from every cell in my body. There was this profound sense of surprise and relief and gratitude that I no longer had to live with the enormous struggle I had to breathe. And whatever was to come in this world, I knew that all of those around me who I loved, especially my wife, would have their lives, and I would be a support and a guide to them in whichever way I could. And so I turned away and began this sense of the healing of my consciousness, which is thoughts, feelings, emotions, and cognition, to remove all of the issues that go on in the brain. For example, as I told you before, I was born with severe learning disabilities, and those disabilities led to a great sense of shame for a long time until my wife led me out of it. I would not have accomplished what I had done at that moment into the world without her love, her reassurance, and her putting a mirror in my face. And in that moment, her face, her voice, her being, which had suffused me, I realized was as much a part of my consciousness as I was of hers, that we were truly what Adam and Eve were called, ezer kenegdo, the help that comes from that which is opposite you. And there was this sense of unity and fulfillment in knowing that wherever I was going, that I was going to be with the root of Eva's soul and return to the root, the ikar of mine, because there's such a little amount of soul here in the world, as I've said before.
This is the third, the third stage.
The third stage is called Kaeya. I'm sorry, neshama, which is all. Each of those words are different kinds of breath. Nefesh is a resting breath, one that contains ruach, means wind, like the mind that flows without barriers. And Kaeya is the consciousness, the soul connection with all the other souls in the world. It's like the great weaving of the prayer shawl that we wear, that all souls, the individual soul, descends from this great weaving of life itself, Kaeya, which is the feminine form of life. And we are birthed from this down to the neshama, this unique level of being. Oh, I didn't talk about the neshama. So that when I left my consciousness, my psychological issues, my cognition issues, the neshama is this pure soul that brings me into my being and contains the messages of my tikkun, many of which we don't listen to. But in each of my NDEs, my neshama, which comes from the word to truly be filled, to be breathed into, is that my soul is the breath of the Holy One that breathes my uniqueness, not only my strengths, my talents, but also my deficits, and that those are part of my identity, my spiritual being. And so this neshama is that which descends from this great weaving of souls, and that's discussed in a number of philosophical and spiritual images, as far as I can tell, and that contains the core of what it is that my purpose in this world was for.
This is the third dimension.
Yes, this is the third.
Were there any other entities, any other dualities besides the expression of your wife?
Yes. In the neshama, I became reconnected with the formation of my soul in the first place. And this sense of astonishment and surprise, and the sense of being an extension of holy presence in the world and never being alone. The sense of always being part of that which is greater, that the physical tends to block us down from. For example, we learn in the spiritual world not to depend on our physical senses, because they in fact are so limited and deceptive. Rather, it is the unification of what eventually becomes sight, sound, taste, touch, etc. In what is called synesthesia. That's when all of the senses become one single experience. And then when we enter into the body, they begin to bifurcate because of where they get located in the brain. But at moments of transcendence, this sense of perception now is not sight or sound or taste or touch. It is all of it happening together. And that's even described in the segment in Moses with Moses and the people at Mount Sinai. So this, when you enter into neshama, suddenly what has been the bifurcation of the sources of information, of experience, become united into the supernal transcendence of all of it being unified. And there's great astonishment at that. Because in the life review, which gets most intense there, it becomes very clear the way in which I move toward fulfilling the possibilities of the tikkun that's in my soul, in my neshama, and the ways in which I work to do that, whether consciously or, quote, unconsciously, and the effect it had on others, both positive and negative, so that I saw myself and my life from my perspective. But then it turned around and I saw myself in the perspective of the way people saw me. And if you want to talk about hell, that's hell.
So
So
these particular people that you knew by name, you saw them in this experience, you saw their face, their countenance.
Yeah, I read, it's not so much that I saw them. If you want to say I saw them, you can put it that way, though more the sense that I experienced their presence. And my recognition of other souls is not about seeing. In the Ruach level, sometimes there were individuals I saw, uh, and the psychological struggles that I have gone through in my life were there, such as those who had abused me, um, uh, those I had abandoned without knowing I had done it. Um, and I saw the consequences of my dysfunctions. And those had more like faces to them and voices. In the neshama, there is this sense of the unification of experience, so that it's seeing my being not from a 360-degree view, but from being inside a sphere and being able to perceive everything around you, above you, so that I experienced where it was I fit into and destroyed those unifications around me. And there were places where I really had done that. And I was filled with shame and then remorse and pain. And at the same time, I got to experience where I had done wonderful, healing, profoundly purposeful things which had elevated others and had brought me fullness. So that it's never one or the other, it's always both and. And when that happens, there were individual presences who I could name, but I wouldn't here because I don't think it's appropriate, because it calls on their soul presence and it's not appropriate. They don't like to be identified in this world this way.
so can we go on to the next stage?
Okay. So after I went through all of that, let me finish it. Those people came to me to work through what we had mutually done to, with, for each other, and went through a healing process in which we didn't just forgive each other, but we no longer carried either guilt or shame or a sense of um, power or revenge, and more importantly, gave up the status of being victims, so that once you stop being a victim of somebody, that frees you from all of the other entrapments, because there is nothing more powerful for humans in this world than to be a victim and to blame others in a way that you have no role in it. There are those in this world who are truly victimized. It may only be because of their color or their religion. However, they play a role in it simply because they are. That's part of what happened in the my seventh NDE around all of those who died needlessly in the coronavirus. But this issue of what's called Shayla and Tshuva, question and response, was a matter of knitting back together as much of my being in this world as I could before rejoining the Kaeya, this weaving together of all the souls from which I descended into this world. And in this process, my malachim, the four I talked about, and others who were part of the host, Raziel, etc., and at some point Metatron, from which we all descend, because the word Metatron actually comes from the word that means matron in Hebrew. It is, we are birthed, there is a matron who gives us that movement into life, that descending into the world. And so in moving back through Kaeya, it is a matter of finding the place where I fit into the weaving of all soul that's in and around this world, because all soul, that which is here and that which is that was here and that which will be here, since there is no time and no space, forms this great weaving that binds all of existence together. The best way I have to describe that is the initial astronomical statement that the spaces between the galaxies are a void. And now it becomes more clear that these spaces are not empty, that they're filled with dark matter, the dark energy, which are welling up and from which new forms of existence will form, which is why in both the mystic as well as the scientific view, we are we are expanding at greater and greater speeds rather than what is called a steady state universe, so that all of this keeps welling up and that each of us is part of the welling up that will provide opportunities for others coming in and for us to move on to serve in other ways. Once you get to Kaeya, and I only began to be in touch with that, the next step to Yechidah, which means unification with the Holy One in the Source, means that you can't return. And it was at those moments that I was permitted to look through the veil between Kaeya and Yechidah to see this enormous light of love and presence and welcoming, and not forgiveness, but acceptance. There's a big difference between forgiveness and acceptance. And because in acceptance, there is no shame, there is no guilt, there is the understanding of, come my child, let me hold you. And at that moment, in some cases, I was given a choice to go back, and in others, I was told to go back. In this case, I was told that that I needed to take what I'd learned and to go back. And in returning back through those 5 stages, there were other ancestors and other spiritual presences from other, quote, religions who I encountered, from Christianity, from Buddhism, from Hinduism, because I'd also spent time in India, and or I was going to spend time in India, and so I was introduced to it. But I had already studied the Asian religions because Judaism in some ways is much more Asian or Eastern than it is Western. So much of Judaism is misunderstood because of the co-opting of it, both by the other two, quote, Western religions. And in that process, I was informed of something I knew, but intensely part of my knowing is that when we leave this world, we go through a process in which we encounter the holy presences, whether it's Jesus or Buddha or certain kinds of, quote, angels or family members, etc., because it's what we expect and what we need in order to make the transition. And after a while, all of that begins to merge into this understanding that what we think of as religions in this world don't exist in the next level of being. There is a much greater unity of spiritual purpose. So encountering the prophets from other faiths is part of what all of us go through. And so when I came back, I became much more involved in ecumenical work that had begun when I was the Hillel director in Berkeley and had taught at the Jesuit School of Theology and Bible, so that many of those people who had passed came to me and were part of the prayer that we shared about my return and what I was to do. And,
Argue about coming back? Did you argue about coming back? Did you want to come back? Or was it very enticing to just say, no, I'm not coming back?
what I said was, this is so wonderful and beautiful. And I know what I face when I go back into this twisted and shattered body, and that there would be even greater difficulties awaiting me. And they said, you are still needed, and whatever you go through gives you the authority to talk about dealing with pain, illness, death, and loss with the people you will meet and work with in your life. And so I very much missed and still miss that place in which I'm not contained in this, especially now, this twisted, painful physical being. However, now I'm no longer this sense of trapped, imprisoned, because this has now freed me from my beingness being sentenced to this physical reality, that my being here and going through, excuse me, I have throat problems, going through everything that I've shared with you was part of my learning and education that I was to share with others when they came into my life. And that was all I was told. I was given techniques and tools to use, both in teaching, talking, in guiding, and in content, as well as the use of my hands for healing. And when I came back, and then began this enormous struggle with the shingles infection and the pain, until I learned to handle the pain and got myself off the opioids I was on, that I began to use the tools, the knowledge that I had been given.
Okay. And so
Did I answer the question adequately? Is there anything else you want to know?
well, yes, actually, we would like to know what else happened and your process of coming back.
Say that again. I don't think I heard you clearly.
So what else happened? What else happened in your NDE? And then
The moment
and
of-
then how did you return back to your body?
I was shown, quote unquote, presences that I would be meeting, that I would find them familiar when they came to me for whatever reason, but I was not given specific names, just an awareness that when they came to me or called, that I would awaken to knowledge or knowingness about them, which would surprise them and me, and that I would be able to be in an empathic state so intense that I could experience the life of the other, but without intruding in it. So I'm always very careful about whatever I share with people, depending upon what I perceive as their capacity to accept it. So I don't, anybody who comes to work with me, excuse me, either individually or in a class, I'm very careful about who I accept, because there are those who are either ready or struggling with something that I know I can be of some aid in their coming to knowing. And it's that I am only a facilitator for each person or group to arise to that capacity which is inherent in them, as was done to me all my life. And there were those who it was clear I couldn't help. Yeah. And I always made it very clear to people after, could be in the first session, could be in the second. And I would say, you know, I don't think that I'm really the right person for you. Let me refer you out. And that would be it.
So the first breath you took after you returned, after you had been released from your body and were free from the breathing, that first moment you took your breath and you were back in your body, what did you experience? What did you feel?
Again, that first breath was a sense of awe, of being both here in this limited space and at the same time being infinite and eternal, feeling both at the same time. And I didn't take a breath, as I talked about in an earlier session. I learned to receive the breath. So that first breath was like, or was a replay of the breath from the doctor who brought me to life, to the breath of my wife's first kiss, to the shared breath with others who I taught to breathe in a spiritual way, in which we were breathing in and out of each other without having to physically kiss, but to understand what is called the nishika, the spiritual kiss of the Holy One, the Shekhinah actually, that breathes us into life. Physically would be in the placenta, but spiritually, it's when the placenta is cut and there is that first breath that is blown into the child, and the surprise at being able to breathe. Now, I didn't have that same experience, but I've worked with many people and have gone back to that moment, and the same sense of awe, which it goes from fear to ecstasy, and all range of emotions in between, and the beginning of the odyssey of maturing and going through the world. So each time I, quote, received the breath coming back into this body. It was being born again, not into an infant's body, but back into this body, which would be the instrument of my being able to share with others what my experience has been. So, as I said before, many people ask me, if you are so connected, why aren't you healed? Why don't you heal yourself? And when I asked several NDEs before that, the response was, if you speak about what had happened to you, people will have one response. If you talk about what's happening to you and what you face, it carries another level of impact and of acceptance and identity. And so I live the way I live because it's part of the platform from which I teach and explain, so that I don't talk about what had happened to me. I can talk about what's happening to me at every moment of the day.
Right. And this is when, because shortly after this, your NDE, and you came back, this particular NDE in 2005, you developed this a very severe case of shingles.
Correct. And I was told that I would be going through much more challenging physical moments. And the question would be, the challenge is, would I be able to turn the challenge into a miracle, or to be drowned in it because I simply was unwilling to handle it the way I've been taught?
Yeah.
And the enormous pain that happened from the shingles, which startled and astounded the doctors, was the challenge of my handling all kinds of pain in my life, of which I've had many different kinds, and teaching others that pain is one of the best teachers we have. Pain is not an enemy. Pain is a companion.
So I think that's good.
And by the way, that came from ancestors who themselves had similar physical issues, of course, in times when the medical wasn't available. And many times I'll say that I'll talk about the enormous gratitude I have for the medical community, the knowledge that was built in to the capacity to sustain me, and at the same time, all of the natural medicines and treatments, which I also went into study, that everything in the world is for healing, is some kind of, quote, medicine. But if it were not for the medical community and all of their enormous talents, their creativity, the science, I would not have been able to survive.
Right. So shall we go on to the Grayson scale?
Sure.
And so here's how this works.
Do you feel that you have the energy to do it?
Say again.
Feel you have the energy, the stamina to do it?
Yeah, sure. Let's see what happens. I need to take a break again for a moment. All right.
Pause. So can you tell us more about what drew you back?
It was or is the constant presence in my soul of my wife, Eva, who has been the constant source of my unfolding into who and what I've become over the years. She has been there and helped me through each of my severe illnesses. And I've never once, until just recently, talked about the NDEs or even the abuse that I went through. I simply bask in her profound and beautiful presence, not just physically, but her soul. She would sing to me, and her voice is glorious. And she would put her hands on me or lay my prayer shawl, my talit over me, and guide me through the prayers that are the expression of gratitude and yichud and union, um, that are the daily prayers of Jews. And uh, without her, my attachment to this world wouldn't exist. She said to me, um, after this one, she said, I'm not sure if you're really attached here. And I said, I am more attached here than I have ever been, because I know now more of what I have to do, but because I miss you so much when I'm not here. And because of your your presence of the, I call her the vessel of the Shekhinah, this this profound female dimension of the holy being that contains and holds. And she has been doing that for me for almost 48 years. Then I have my three children, each of whom have their very own unique identity. And I come back due to my devekut, my attachment, my bonding with each of them in their own unique ways. And I have such love and pride for them. It's hard to express. So that returning is not just about the work I have to do. It is the profound attachment, the bonding I have with the members of my immediate family, and then with those who over the years I've studied and learned and with, and who have taught me and have guided me, um, and who have studied with me. And I had a group of 7 men who studied with me for 7 years. One of the most enigmatic books in Kabbalah. And we just got through the first chapter in 7 years, a book called Sefer Yetzirah. And those 7 men were and all are always part of the loving connection that welcomes me back into the world. And it's not just them physically, it's first the soul encounter that comes as I begin to enter into my neshama, my ruach, and my nefesh, because they are all such a deep, integral part of my being.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.